Nobody talks about anything else but enjoying themselves. But under the glittering surface of high society, tension brews. Between the old and the new, the accepted and the rejected, the seen and the invisible. HBO's The Gilded Age is more than just corsets and chandeliers. It's a tightrope walk between historical truth and narrative flair. Today, we're pulling back the velvet curtain to expose what's fact, what's fiction, and what falls somewhere deliciously in between. Hold on tight, because history doesn't always wait for the facts to catch up. The Gilded Age, while largely a fictional drama, smartly roots itself in the real-world social theater of late 19th century New York. Characters like Ward McAllister, Mamie Fish, and the commanding Mrs. Astor weren't just figments of Julian Fellowes' imagination. They were formidable forces in their own right. These real-life society giants ruled with an iron glove covered in velvet, determining who was in and who would always remain on the outside. While the main families, the Russells and Van Ryns, are fictional, the ecosystem they occupy was very much real. By weaving true socialites into the web of drama, the show crafts a glittering but believable world. It's a delicate balancing act, creating captivating storylines while tipping its hat to the people who actually walked those marbled halls. Fellowes doesn't aim for perfect historical recreation, but he gets close enough that it feels like we're peeking through time. One of the strongest factual threads the show weaves is through the character of Peggy Scott. A young, ambitious black writer, Peggy's journey is not only compelling but historically grounded. The show positions her in the black elite community of Brooklyn, writing for a black-owned newspaper, a reflection of the real-life New York Globe and its editor, T. Thomas Fortune. Peggy's struggles and triumphs as a writer of color in a world that's not ready to accept her voice are heartbreakingly accurate. She's asked to change her story and her skin to be more palatable, a demand many black creatives of the time faced. But the show doesn't just stop at struggle, it shows her agency. Her rejection of whitewashing is a statement. By working at the Globe, Peggy becomes part of a louder, bolder movement of black journalism, one that defied silence with unapologetic words. It's not just dramatization, it's representation of a truth long buried under the weight of white narratives. But not every narrative decision stands up to historical scrutiny. Take, for instance, Agnes Van Ryn's hiring of Peggy Scott as her personal secretary. It's a beautiful twist. Two women from entirely different worlds finding common purpose and perhaps even friendship. But would such an arrangement have existed in 1880s New York? Unlikely. Even the show's own historical consultant admits this scenario is a stretch. At a time when even the most progressive households would balk at elevating a black woman to such a visible position, the idea of Agnes, a relic of old money tradition, making that offer rings more of hopeful fiction than historical probability. Still, that doesn't make it useless. It forces us to ask, what if more people had made such choices? The scene may be fictional, but it dares the viewer to imagine a better, braver past. And then there's the Statue of Liberty's hand. Sounds surreal, right? A colossal copper hand just sitting in a park. But that's exactly what New Yorkers saw in Madison Square from 1876 to 1882. The show uses this oddity as a backdrop for romantic tension between Marion and Tom Rakes, but it's more than just a courtship setting. It's a subtle nod to American ambition and the symbolic promise of freedom that often failed to deliver, especially to people like Peggy. The statue's hand, reaching skyward, is both literal and metaphorical. It was sent to the U.S. to raise money for the pedestal and drew quite a crowd. The show's decision to place its characters in the shadow of Liberty's hand is brilliant. It reminds viewers that even symbols of freedom often need help standing up. When it comes to Thomas Edison and electricity lighting up New York, the show gets most of the facts right, just with a bit of dramatic embellishment. The real event happened in the afternoon, but the Gilded Age shifts it to nighttime for theatrical effect. We don't blame them. Who wouldn't want to see New York shimmer to life under Edison's glow after dark? The show even places him flipping the switch outside the New York Times building, though historically it was done at his Pearl Street station. Still, the overall sentiment is correct. This was a turning point for modern living, one that widened the gap between those who could afford innovation and those still living by candlelight. The glow of progress doesn't always shine equally, and Fellows subtly reminds us of that in how his characters respond to this new marvel. One of the boldest things the Gilded Age does is address racism not as a Southern issue but as a national one. Too often, Northern cities are sanitized in historical fiction, but here racism seeps through the cracks. Quiet, systemic, persistent. Peggy faces rejection from editors, sideways glances from white servants, and outright bias from employers. These moments aren't exaggerated, they're necessary. The North may have abolished slavery, but it hadn't shed its prejudice. The show does well to highlight that, particularly in the way Peggy navigates each indignity with weary grace. It's not loud racism, it's the kind that smothers, erases, and excludes. And in that sense, the show holds a mirror to a society that still struggles with these dynamics today. The era's explosive economic growth is another aspect the show handles with precision. The 1870s to 1900s marked a time of railroad tycoons, stock market booms, and industries rising like steel towers. The Russells, fictional as they may be, are representative of real industrialists who amassed unimaginable fortunes almost overnight. But as much as this era birthed billionaires, it also birthed despair. The show contrasts the opulence of drawing rooms with the grit of those who serve in them. It hints at the rising tide of wealth disparity, though it stops short of diving into the harshest realities. Still, the bones are there, the top 1% hoarding more than 11 million families combined. The show doesn't need to scream about inequality. It lets the silence in the servants' quarters say it all. However, the depiction of those servants could use a bit more authenticity. The show's downstairs life often mirrors that of its upper crust characters, full of tea, gossip, and love intrigues. But the reality for servants in the Gilded Age was brutally physical. Without modern appliances, they hauled water, scrubbed soot, and worked grueling hours. These workers weren't just part of the backdrop. They were the gears keeping the mansion machine running. While the show flirts with this reality, it doesn't quite plunge in. You rarely see the sweat, the burns, the backaches. Instead, we get elegant subplots that humanize the staff but miss the grind. It's a romanticized version of a life that was anything but. If there's one area where the Gilded Age shatters misconceptions, it's in its depiction of a thriving black upper class. Yes, it's historically accurate. Yes, it's long overdue. Figures like Peggy's father, based on real-life pharmacist Philip Augustus White, embody the often erased truth that success wasn't reserved for the white elite. Black professionals in New York carved out spaces of education, enterprise, and elegance. These communities weren't anomalies, they were movements. And the show dares to put them front and center, not as side characters, but as architects of their own legacy. It's not just about inclusion, it's about correction. History forgot them, but the Gilded Age does not. The show's treatment of real architectural icons like Stanford White lends further credibility to its world building. White's architectural fingerprints were all over New York's most extravagant homes, and the show captures his flair for grandeur without turning him into a caricature. Similarly, real events like the Opera Wars show how high society squabbled over taste, control, and reputation. These feuds weren't just about seats, they were about power. The new rich didn't just want homes, they wanted institutions that welcomed them. And that's where the drama sings loudest, not in ballroom dances, but in subtle social coups. At its core, the Gilded Age revolves around one timeless theme: old money versus new money. This conflict defines every stare, snub, and scandal in the show. The Van Ryns, with their Dutch heritage and quiet disdain, stand guard over tradition, while the Russells bulldoze their way into prominence with railroad wealth and unapologetic ambition. This friction wasn't just fictional, it was everywhere in the 1880s. New money was crashing the gates, and the old guard didn't like the view. What makes it brilliant is how the show refuses to pick a side. It presents both with strengths and flaws, letting us decide if either truly deserves to lead society into the future. In a world built on inheritance and innovation, every detail in the Gilded Age teeters between what was and what could have been. Maybe that's the point, not to recreate history, but to provoke it. To ask, what if the right people had been allowed in? What if change hadn't knocked? What if it had barged in sooner? In peeling back the gold-leafed layers, we see more than a glamorous drama. We see the echoes of a past that still shapes our present. Because in the end, history isn't just about what happened, it's about who gets to tell it.